So I want to first of all give you some provenance for this particular set of reflections. They are from the Indo-Tibetan tradition. They almost certainly go back to India, and we don't exactly know how, but they emerged in Tibet as a worked out set sometime in the Middle Ages, 14th, 15th, 16th century, I'm not sure when. Before that, they must have been part of the general ambiance, but they fit into a pattern of practice that definitely goes back to India. You don't need to know this in a certain sense, because our own system of practice doesn't exactly follow this pattern. But I will tell you what it is so that you get some idea, and you will see that some of our practices do fit into this schema. So Indian Buddhism, rather, as you probably know, developed over 1500 years into a very rich and complex system with many, many different traditions, many different great teachers, and many different lineages of teaching. But there was a common thread to the most evolved forms of Buddhism in India, what we would now call Vajrayana or Tantrayana. The Vajrayana traditions, which are really no better than the early traditions, they're just more worked out, more developed, and in a way more rich in terms of symbology and so on. These systems consisted of a process of, oh, my microphone is coming through crackly, could change. If I put it further away, is that any better? Any better? Yeah, probably too close to my face. So these Vajrayana systems consisted essentially of two great stages. We'll see later there was a third stage. The first stage consisted in the visualization of Buddhas and Bodhisattvas, which you conjured up in front of you, or in some practices you conjured up inside you, or you saw yourself, as it were, replaced by Avalokiteshvara or Tara. Some of us do those practices now. So you get into communication with an embodiment of enlightenment. That is an embodiment of the Dhamma. That is an embodiment of the way things truly are. So you come into a relationship in which you see the figure in front of you and you send forth devotion, praise and so on, and you receive blessings. Blessings and adhisthana, which is sometimes translated as grace. I'm not going to go into this very fully, but it's as if in that contact you're raised up towards the level of the Buddha or Bodhisattva, so that you become more like them. Not just, well, not physically, but in your mind. Your mind becomes more like their mind. You're raised to the rank of the Buddha or Bodhisattva. So that's what's called the generation stage, the creation stage, where you're setting up. Your speaker is not working. Okay. You're setting up a figure in front of you that is the embodiment of reality, and then you're coming into a communication with that. And thereby you're transforming yourself, as you do in any communication. If you're in communication with somebody who's of a greater depth of Dhammic experience than you, well, you'll be raised up in your communication. So that's the generation stage. What follows that is called the completion stage. At this stage, you drop the image and you simply enter into the state of awareness that the image represents. In other words, you simply unite with reality. You unite with the Dhamma. That's the process of visualization practice, and all of those who've been ordained will be doing practices according to that schema, more or less consciously. We try to visualize Buddhas and Bodhisattvas either outside us or within us. And then at the end, we dissolve the figure into us or into the blue sky, and we just sit with the effect that that has upon us. That is, we sit in, to some degree, non-duality, in a state that is beyond self, in a selfless state. So that is called the completion stage. So the Vajrayana system consisted of generation and completion, putting it all extremely simply. And this is a very, very profound way of practicing. It's a way of practicing that all order members have accessible to them, even though we don't frame it in the Vajrayana context. We do this kind of practice. But obviously, this sort of practice is very, very deep and very intense, and it requires a certain level of experience, a kind of orientation, if you're to engage with it fully and successfully. Because if you don't have that orientation, if you don't have that perspective, you're just seeing pretty pictures. And when you come to the completion stage, it's nothing. It's just a sort of a low-level calmness. So in order to make it work, there has to be something before that. What that is, of course, commitment, going for refuge to the three jewels. In order to engage with this sort of practice, you need to be committed to the Buddha, Dhamma and Sangha. You need to be committed to the process that generation and completion take you through. Okay? You need other things as well. You need great devotion. You need purity, so that your mind is free from the effects of your past karma. You need great confidence in the tradition that you're practicing within, and you need a great sense of compassion. You need to feel that what you're doing not just for yourself, but for all. You're not just trying to gain freedom and happiness for yourself. Because if you're trying to gain freedom and happiness for yourself, you won't get it. Because it's just about you. And freedom and happiness come from transcending self-clinging, self-attachment. So you try to practice for the benefit of others. So before we engage with generation and completion, we prepare ourselves. We prepare ourselves with 5 practices, one of which will be familiar to all who've asked for ordination, and that is the going for refuge and prostration practice, which develops a strong sense of commitment. You also do the bodhicitta practice, in which you develop a sense that you're going for refuge not just for yourself, but for all. You develop the Vajrasattva practice, which is a practice of purification. You see a Buddha figure above your head who is pouring white nectar into you that is driving away all your unskillfulness, all the residual effects of your past karma, bad karma, that is. And you practice the offering of the mandala, which is a very elaborate puja. So you're developing very strong devotion, and you develop the guru yoga, in which you see your guru and the guru's guru, and all the way back to the Buddha. You see the lineage of gurus, and they are giving you their blessings and lifting you up to their level. So these are called the 5 inner preliminaries. Again, I'm slightly oversimplifying, but it'll do. These 5 mula yogas. Mula means root. Even today, the Hindi word for a radish is mool, a root. So the mula yogas is the root yogas, the root practices that you need to engage in if you are to be able to generate the Buddha in front of you, and it for to be really the Buddha that you're connecting with, and then to move on to completion. And it for to be a real completion in which you are uniting with reality itself. So these are the preliminaries, the Mula Yogas. But even in order to do the Mula Yogas, you need some preliminaries. If you just start doing those Mula Yogas without having done some work on your mind, some very basic work on your mind, the Mula Yogas, again, are just exercises, if you like. I remember Bhante once showing us an advertisement, I think it was from the Vajrasattva Sun, which is a newspaper put out by Trungpa Rinpoche's Vajrasattva movement in America. And it had lots and lots of advertisements on the back. A lot of therapists, because Trungpa tried to use the language of therapy. Whether successfully or not, you might debate. Bhante was certainly not convinced. But anyway, one of those advertisements was for prostration therapy, going for refuge therapy. And even if it was used as a sort of a come on, it's such a sort of a letting down of something so profound that it negates what it's actually about. Going for refuge is not merely therapy. It has a therapeutic effect. There's no doubt it will sort out your mental problems if you have them. And over time, by going for refuge, you'll be able to resolve past issues, past difficulties. Experienced that to some extent myself, and I've seen it happen with others. But you have to be going for refuge for the sake of the three jewels, not for the sake of resolving your problems, if you see what I mean. So there has to be something that precedes that. What has to precede the engagement with the Mula Yogas is the turning of the mind away from samsara towards nirvana. You have to turn your mind away from the everyday world as it appears to us. As it appears to us, of course, the everyday world persists even when you've turned away from it. But the way in which you understand it, the way in which you interpret it, you have to turn away from that, and with the craving and the self-attachment, the hatred that goes with that, you have to turn your mind away from that towards nirvana, towards the Buddha, towards self-transcendence, towards the benefit, the happiness of all beings. So in order to engage with this process of Mula Yogas, generation stage, completion stage, you need to turn your mind. You need to turn your mind away from the usual preoccupations towards something transcendental. So these mind turnings are a systematization of that process. They're a way of engaging with that process. As always, the system is not the purpose, if you see what I mean. The purpose isn't simply to do the 4 mind turnings or the 5 Mula Yogas. They're merely expedients, they're methods, they're the raft by which you cross. But the main thing is that you turn your mind towards the Buddha. You turn your mind towards nirvana. And so the 4 contemplations that we're going to be looking at over these 2 days are ways of doing that. They're systematic ways of getting ourselves to turn away from our usual grasping onto everyday reality as it's normally appeared, conventional reality. It doesn't mean you're turning away from people, it doesn't mean you're turning away from what's just there. It means your attitude to it is changing fundamentally, because you're really beginning to understand it as it truly is. So just a little bit more of background. These 4, I've not been able to trace them far back. They emerged as a set sometime in the Middle Ages in Tibet. I have a strong feeling that they go back to India, and I think they may go back to Sarvastivada sources. Some of you may know some of Buddhist history, but one of the most important of the early schools of Buddhism that paralleled the Theravada. Sarvastivada, probably the basis for the Mahayana. So they probably go back into the Sarvastivada tradition, but I've not been able to trace that back. I'd like to. But they very clearly are traditional in their flavour. You will find these, not explicitly, but more or less explicitly, in the Pali Canon itself. There's a famous set in the Samyutta Nikaya, the 5 contemplations that everyone should engage in. The Buddha says everybody should reflect on these every day, which is, I'll just read them. I'm sure to become old, I cannot avoid aging. Believe me, this is true. I'm sure to become ill, I cannot avoid illness. I'm sure to die, I cannot avoid death. I must be separated and parted from all that is dear and beloved by me. Then fifthly, I am the owner of my actions, my karma that is, heir of my karma. Karma is the womb from which I have sprung. Karma is my karmas are my relations. My karmas are my protection. Whatever actions I do, good or bad, of these I shall become heir. So the Buddha asks us to reflect on these. If anybody wants to know, it's Samyutta Nikaya, section 5, verse 57. But the Buddha asks us to reflect on these every day, and somewhere he says, if we don't reflect in this sort of way every day, our mind will just be full of desire, just be full of craving, full of attachment. So these 4 reflections that we're going to be using today are sort of a relative of these very early reflections, and which you'll find represented in a number of different ways. And what's really important is not the 4 or the 5 or the 10 or whatever. What's really important is that you engage actively in your own way in turning your mind towards the ideal, in turning your mind towards the Buddha, turning your mind towards the Dhamma. And I think before we start to actually talk about the specifics of these practices, it's good if everybody connects a little bit with their own experience. I can speak of your own experience with great confidence, because why on earth are you here if you haven't had something of this experience? Something of a sense of the inadequacy of ordinary everyday life. Something of a sense of the ephemeral character of existence. Something of a sense of the implications of death. You know, when you think about death, it changes life, doesn't it? I remember a very close friend of mine, Dhammachari Punya, who Harsha Prabhu will know well. We worked together at converting the London Buddhist Centre. But anyway, a few years ago, he died from a brain tumour. And he was diagnosed with a tumour and given just months to live. And he was living in the States at that time, but he came over to see all his old friends, and he came to see me. I was his Kalyana Mitra. And he told me that since he'd had the diagnosis, he'd started to live. For the first time, he felt he was alive. And he said he didn't feel sad or anxious at all. He just felt fully alive and taking each day as it came and living well, living deeply. And you could see it. He was glowing, even though he's clearly very ill. And I've encountered this 2 or 3 times. Well, just imagine, there's a very nice film, which, because we're in Ipswich, about, what's his name? Dr. Feelgood? What was his name? Canvey Island. Wilko Johnson. Come on, some of you must remember him. It's a lovely film. He brought up on Canvey Island, which is in your parish after all. And
I think that's Wilko Johnson, yeah?
Wilco Johnson was he called? Yeah, he was diagnosed with a serious cancer, and later it turned out he hadn't got one. But anyway, he described his feeling as he came out of the surgery, having had the diagnosis, and he was resorting to William Blake and other sources of that kind in order to try to give expression to his feeling of the richness of life. He said again, he'd never felt so alive. So if you really connect with death, it's going to wake you up. It's going to make you realize this life is not just to be frittered away. It's not just to be idled away. It's to be used for something really beneficial. And since we're in contact with the Dhamma, it's to be used for the practice of the Dhamma. So I'd like to ask you just to, maybe after this in your tea break or whatever, just to think through moments of that kind when you have connected with the reality of things, when you've really seen, oh my goodness, it really is impermanent. Oh my goodness, I will not be, and so on. And when you really realize, I've got this extraordinary opportunity right now, I must use it. I'm pretty sure that every one of you will be able to think of one or two occasions in your life, and probably a great many more, which have led you to turn your mind to the Dhamma, and that have led you here. I doubt if you'd come to a Buddhist centre unless you'd had some inkling of this kind. And it is definitely a feeling of a transformation, a turning, a different turning in your life. One moment you're facing this way, the next you're facing that way. One moment you're facing like that, the next you're facing like that. That's the nature of the transformation. And I've seen it in other people. And as an order member, teaching in a centre and so forth, I've often experienced people come to me, especially in connection with death, saying, somebody close to me died, tragically, and I now know what life is really about, and I want to give myself to the Dhamma. Unfortunately, one has a certain amount of experience, both of oneself and of other people, and one thinks, jolly good, I hope this lasts more than tomorrow. Generally, it doesn't last that long because life just takes over. The habit of things takes over. That the habitual belief that real satisfaction can be found within existence. If only we can arrange the deck chairs in the right combination, the iceberg will not hit the Titanic. Or was it the other way around? We're sort of constantly arranging the deck chairs on the deck of the Titanic while it's going down. We don't notice the situation we're in. We notice it briefly every now and again, and that may be enough to get us through the door of a Buddhist centre. It may be enough to motivate us to ask to be mitras. It may even make us ask to be order members. But it has to be strong enough for us to leave self-clinging behind altogether, to let go of self, to become completely selfless. That's ultimately what it has to be strong enough to do. Then, when we do the preliminary, the Mula Yogas, they'll really be effective. Our going for refuge will be real, in Bante's sense, of fully what we mean, not just an exercise. Our purification will be full. We will be clean morally. Our bodhicitta practice, our sense of our practice with others will be a felt experience, not just a sort of imaginative one in the narrow sense. Our offerings, our puja, will be heartfelt from the bottom of our heart. And our devotion to the teachers who've brought us here will be absolutely wholehearted. So we'll be opening up to the transcendental that they have awakened us to. And then when we generate the Buddha or Bodhisattva, it really will be the Buddha or Bodhisattva. And when we merge them with us and sit in completion, we will really be in reality. So you have to go back to the bottom, and we have to turn our minds away from samsara, to put it simplistically, towards nirvana. We have to turn our minds away from the petty doings of our normal preoccupation. Preoccupation with getting things, with success, with being liked, being loved, being praised, being successful in very many ways, and so on. Those are our usual preoccupations. We're concerned with ourselves. It's perfectly reasonable. It's what as animals we're programmed to do, and as human beings we've taken to a very high pitch of perfection. But we have to gradually transfer the weight of our lives onto the path, as it were, away from the wheel onto the path. And that requires us to face fully up to the situation we are in. The situation that we're in is that we are here for an indefinite period of time, although it has a certain date. The fell sergeant death is on his way. We don't know when. I was reading a text just yesterday in which it comes from the Buddha himself, in which he says, the span of life is no more than 100 years. But of course, it may not even be 100 years. It may be nothing. So that being the case, what is this for? What's this whole exploratory kit that we've been given? This extraordinary assemblage of flesh and blood with a consciousness of extraordinary capacity connected with it. What's it for? And how are we going to use it well? What are we going to use this existence that we've got right now for? Have to have that sort of reflection. And again, I'm sure that everybody's had that feeling. I remember it very much as a young man, almost more like an old boy than a young man, that sort of feeling, what on earth am I here for? And I dropped out of Christianity, and I tried to live as a sort of amateur existentialist, but it just wasn't biting enough. It just wasn't convincing enough. It didn't really answer things. So that persistent question, just again and again in the depths of the night often, why? Why am I here? What is this for? What shall I do with myself? Yeah, you know, that feeling, what on earth am I going to do with myself? All this energy, all this awareness, all this intelligence, this sensitivity, with all its limitations, what am I going to do with it? So try to connect with those sort of feelings. So I'm doing it my own way, but you'll have your own way of thinking like this. And that's what's important, not the four reflections themselves, not the four mind turnings themselves. What's important is the way in which you yourself actually, really engage with your questioning of the apparent fixity and desirability of conventional reality. So if you can, try to pick those points out, because then when you do the four reflections, they won't be just abstract, sort of floating in the middle of the air. They'll be connecting with something you've already got alive in you. It's a great danger with spiritual life. I remember a very good friend of mine, Dhammachari Nagabodhi, saying that at a certain point he realized it was as if he'd built a sort of tower, the edifice of his Dhamma life, but he'd built it next door to the foundations of his inspiration. Particular experiences he'd had earlier in his life, which had led him to the Dhamma, and then he sort of led a Dhamma life that wasn't actually connected with its own with the roots that had brought him there, the foundations on which the edifice was built. I found that very, very salutary and could reflect on it myself. You go through the motions of the Dhamma. Tibetans are very good at this. That they conventionally you have to do 100,000 of each of the 4 reflections that you're going to be engaging with. You have to say the phrases in them 100,000 times. It's quite a lot. But what Tibetans will do is they'll race through them, and you know they'll be saying, well, I've done my 400 outer preliminaries, 400,000 outer preliminaries, and then they'll rush through the 500,000 mula yogas. It's just a box ticking. Of course, it'll have some effect, but it's odd. You can get into the mood of doing these practices in a way that is the antithesis of what they're about. And I think the antidote always is connect with your original inspiration, your original insight. Everybody's got insight. Insight's this big word that's barked about the place these days. But everybody comes here with some degree of insight. Everybody's pierced the veil of things a little bit, at least on some occasions. Otherwise, you wouldn't be here. So find that. Find those moments when you've really realized this life is precious and I must use it well. Find those occasions when you've really seen death. Perhaps when somebody close to you's died, or when you yourself have had a narrow scrape. A lot of people do get that from illness or accidents or whatever. Death's breath is on your face, and that has its own effect. Maybe there's a recoil in terror. There probably will be also some recognition, some realization. So connect with that, those moments when you've really understood, I'm going to die. I will not be here. Then try to connect with the recognition of the power of karma. How karma is the real shaping force in your life. And it will be the real shaping force in the life to come. According to Buddhist theory, the deeds that you do in this life, and especially the deeds that you do towards the end of your life, and especially the state of mind with which you die, has a strong determining effect upon your next life. And it makes all the difference as to whether you'll connect with the Dhamma or not, and whether you'll have a good circumstances or not. It's not a social question, but more a moral environment. So yes, those moments when you've really seen that karma is the big thing. Doesn't matter in a certain sense what other people do to you. What matters is what you do. And this isn't just words. This is reality. It's karma that shapes consciousness. It shapes also the way you get feedback from the world around you. But the fundamental issue of karma is it's shaping your mind. That's what you're using when you meditate. You're using the power of karma. You're forming skillful intentions which have the effect of creating a better mind, a higher state of consciousness, a more glowing state of consciousness, a more maitriful state of consciousness. And then the last one, of course, is the kicker, as they say, the big one. The reflection that conditioned existence is inherently unsatisfactory. You cannot rearrange samsara so that it's perfect for you. It cannot be done. You cannot get all the pieces in place so that you are eternally happy. And this is, again, not just pious sentiment. This is logic. If you analyze the situation, if you analyze the nature of desire, the nature of satisfaction, if you analyze the nature of reality, the impermanence of things, the insubstantiality, and so on, it's impossible to find abiding satisfaction. You can have pleasure, And for a while you can be ahead of the game, you can be winning, but you cannot win always and forever. For a start, well, for an end, you're going to die and it'll all go. So you need to recognize, we need to recognize the essential, inherent unsatisfactoriness of the existential situation that we find ourselves in. It cannot be perfected. And chasing after rearranging it, perfecting it, is doomed. It's as if we're always chasing the chimera of complete satisfaction. So you're sort of looking forward to something. Like do you remember those days when you used to work Monday to Friday? Do you remember towards the end of the week, you start to long for the weekend? Maybe you didn't, but the sort of thing where you think of a future event. I remember this so strongly. I had the misfortune of going to an expensive public school where I was forced to have cold showers and bad food. Got a good education, but and was beaten for it as well. But I used to start ticking off the days to the end of term. To begin with, it would be 30 days, 29. And after a while, it would be so many hours, longing for the end. And then, of course, you get home and it's just reality. Yeah, it's a nicer reality and there are no cold showers and the food's better, but it's just reality. But we're constantly seeking a satisfaction in arrangement of reality, in arrangement of conditioned reality. It can't be done. But we keep trying. We're programmed to keep trying. It's a deep instinctual drive within us, which is going to take a lot of work to get beyond. So, brothers and sisters, I'm asking you, before you engage in these 4 reflections, to try to connect with your own experience of them already. You're not being introduced to something you don't know. You're being introduced to something that will help you to deepen what you already know. And find your own way into it. Use the phrases, but after some time you can work them into your own experience. You yourselves know these things. Otherwise, why are you here? You wouldn't be here if you hadn't got some inkling that conditioned existence is inadequate and some strong attraction to the Dhamma as representing a transcendence of that, where real happiness, real satisfaction can lie and where real harmony can be, and so on, where the problems of existence can be resolved. So I think this is my main message. Just try to connect with these principles which will be already part of your own experience. Write them down, share them with each other in the group sessions, and I think then you'll find that when you're led through these 4 reflections, they have much greater meaning for you. If you don't get to that point by the time you start doing the reflections, then during the reflections, just sort of think, is this something new for me? Have I not seen this before? Is this not familiar to me? And then I think you'll find the practices cease to be sort of formulaic, and they become tools for you to deepen an experience you already have. I think it's a very important perspective. I've come to think that probably what happened in the Buddhist tradition is that in the tantric phase, well, really in all the phases, nothing was particularly organized. There were loads of teachings, and you applied them. And you applied them from your own concerns, your own interests. And yes, you had teachers who you revered and you wished to learn from. And these teachers could give you guidance. But there's always a sense that you were coming from your own experience. And gradually this became formalized. And that's valuable. The formalization gives us something. It gives us a sort of structure. And we see that structure slowly emerging in Buddhist history. We see the five Mula Yogas, the five inner preliminaries, as they're called, the Prostration Practice, Vajrasattva Practice, etc. We see those in Indian Buddhism. These are quite clear in Indian Buddhist authors before Tibetan Buddhism really got going. And then we see them being taken to India. We see them in Naropa, and of course in Marpa and then Milarepa, and we see it in other lineages that came into Tibet, Atisha and the mind training lineages. We see these coming into Tibet, and then of course later on we see them becoming more formulated, more formalized, and that's good. It's fine. It's useful. In a way, that's what Bante's done for us. He's taken from the total Buddhist tradition and is helping us to build a sort of way of approaching Dhamma life that is suitable to us. But we must never lose contact with our own original inspiration and our own original insight. So I'll say one more word by way of preliminary, which is again a bit more information to connect you with the teacher and the lineage from which these teachings come to us. Bhante Urgyen Sangharakshita received these practices in the context of an initiation he had in, it must have been I'm not sure when, but sometime in the 1960s. I'm sorry, I should have looked that up beforehand. But he made friends with, or more that the Lama made friends with him, a very important 20th century Lama, Kachu Rinpoche, who was a Tibetan, but had come to Sikkim in order to be the head of the royal monastery, the Pemyongtse monastery. And he was a very outstanding character, and you can read about him in Bante's book, Precious Teachers. Extraordinary character with obviously some psychic powers, which Bante witnessed for himself. You know, for instance, Bante was translating for him with an American scholar, and at a certain point, Bante realized that Kachu Rinpoche, though he couldn't understand a word of English, was answering before Bante had asked the question. He was picking up the question from the questioner. That's what Bante said. I've no reason to doubt him. But anyway, Kachu Rinpoche was very, very keen that he had initiation from his guru, Jamyang Khyentse Rinpoche, which Bante had. In fact, the Manjushri sadhana, that the image behind me here. But he also, Jamyang Khyentse Rinpoche, wanted Bante to receive the practice of Guru Padmasambhava. And so Kachu Rinpoche came to his monastery, in Bante's monastery in Kalimpong, and gave him the initiation with the explanation and the teachings of the practice of Guru Padmasambhava. Bante one day during the initiation went into the bazaar in Kalimpong to do some shopping, marketing, as they say in India. And while he was there getting the vegetables and so forth, he saw an old Tibetan who had bundles of texts in front of him, which he was selling. Lots of Tibetans came out of Tibet with whatever they could bring, and they would sell them for whatever they could get, because they were destitute. They came into India completely destitute, and there was very little arrangement for them initially. Anyway, Bante wanted to help, so he didn't know what the text was. He just gave him what he had in his pocket, took the text back, showed it to Kachu Rinpoche, who looked at it, and of course, being of this sort of magical psychic kind of quality, immediately deeply impressed. He said, "This is extremely significant. This is a text connected with Guru Padmasambhava, which originates with Guru Padmasambhava, and which is about the whole preliminary practices. It's called the Tarpidilam, which means the smooth path to enlightenment, or sometimes even the quick path to enlightenment."
and he gave Bhante the authorization for it. Bhante then went through that text with another very close friend, Dada Rinpoche. He was actually a Gelugpa, but they formed a very close connection. He's also one of Bhante's gurus. And they translated together the text into English. Apparently they used to speak a strange mixture of Tibetan, Nepali, Hindi and English. Anyway, they managed to do a translation on that basis. And that translation contains a condensed look at these four preliminaries that you will be doing today. There are many different forms of them, but in a sense you could say that's our lineage, that's our way into these practices. And Kachi Rinpoche gave Bhante the authorization to practice and study these, and he did that for some years, I believe. So we're continuing the tradition of our own teacher and our teacher's teachers, going right back to India, going right back to the Buddha. And we're making the reflections that millions and millions of Buddhists have engaged with throughout the centuries, over 2,500 years, across the whole world, in different ways. And we're connecting with our own deepest experience. And we're trying to enlarge that, bring it more out into the open. We're trying to get to the point where we live on that basis. So I wish you all good fortune in this exploration. It's extremely exciting, and there couldn't be anything more important. So please, if you discuss this, please connect with your own experience, even though you don't know these practices yet. I think you've probably got some idea of the area they fall into. And then if you've got any questions, I'd be very happy to explore them. So I'll leave you to it, and I'll see you at 12 o'clock, if I'm still alive and you're still alive.